Today is March 31st, 2023. My name is Karen Neurohr. I'm with the Oklahoma Oral History Research Program at the OSU Library in Stillwater, and I'm here today with Connie Cronley, who knew Angie Debo, and we are going to talk about her friend Angie Debo today. Thank you for participating in the interview. Appreciate it very much.
Well, I appreciate you inviting me. I feel very inadequate for this, but I'm happy to help anything for Dr. Debo's reputation.
Okay, so let's start the interview by having you tell me a little bit about yourself.
I live in Tulsa, Oklahoma. I was born in Neurohr, Oklahoma, and I've lived in Oklahoma all my life except for a couple of years in Coffeyville, Kansas, where I went to community college. So I went to Tulsa then to finish my degree at the University of Tulsa and began working and stayed there all my life, which has been very long. And I've had lots of jobs, all in communication, for an advertising agency, a television station. I worked at the university. I managed a ballet company, and then I took time off to write some books, and then I managed a soup kitchen. So I'm an old dame. I have had many jobs, but throughout all of that, I was always writing, freelancing, and that's how I happened to write lots of articles about Dr. Debo and some with Dr. Debo, and we shared the money. She thought that was a lot of fun. It was only a couple of $100, but we both were grateful for it. So after I quit working full-time out of the house, I retrieved my notes about Kate Barnard that I had started back in the 70s and finished that book. And that's why I'm in Stillwater now talking about the Kate Barnard biography and how Dr. Debo encouraged me and helped me to get started writing it.
Yeah.
And this is the book. This is the woman herself, Kate Barnard. It's called A Life on Fire, and I love everything about this cover. I love the Belle Epoque hat that she has on and clothes, the colors of it, because it was a fiery life. But this was the late 1890s, I think, this picture. And from then on, she dressed very plainly. It's very serious. So that's why I am here. And the last time I was here to give a talk at the university, and I can't even remember what it was about. It might have been something to do with the church, Episcopal Church. It might have been something to do with ballet. I don't know. But Dr. Debo wanted me to stop by and see her before I gave the talk. So I usually, when I saw her, I didn't stop. I never visited the campus. I just went straight through to Marshall. So I went to see her, and she took my hand and she began telling me, for everything there is a life. The apple tree, this is how it affected me then. Horse in the field, everything has a life's end. She was not well then. And I started crying. She said, "I'm telling you this so you won't cry." And I said, "It's not working." And by the time I got here to give my talk, my eyes were so puffy and my face was red that they wondered, what has that woman been up to? But that's the last time I was speaking, the only other time I've been on campus.
Oh, okay.
I'm very impressed with it, and I'm very impressed with this Angie Debo room.
Well, it's special to be interviewing you in here, surrounded by the things that were in her home, many of which you recognize.
I saw, yes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Take me back and describe when you first met Dr. Debo.
It was mid-70s, mid-1970s, 75, 74, 76, and I was working at the University of Tulsa. I was in charge of publicity for radio and television, and I was an adjunct instructor, which is the lowest thing you can be on a university, teaching journalism classes. But she was brought to the campus to give a talk celebrating the 500th volume to the library. It was a big milestone.
500 million, or
500,000.
Half a million. Okay, 500,000.
500,000.
Mm-hmm.
That volume. And she was invited by her good friend Guy Logston, Dr. Guy Logston, who was head of the library. She loved librarians. I dedicated one of my books of essays to Angie Debo and to the librarians of Oklahoma, whom she loved. So Guy and his wife Phyllis had picked her up and brought her there. And she loved all the librarians and knew them. And she gave a talk in Oliphant Hall. I am from Oklahoma. I had never heard of her, didn't know anything about Oklahoma history. Oliphant Hall was one of the biggest auditoriums on campus then, and it was packed. And buses had brought school children in, including a couple of buses of Native American children. She particularly loved seeing them. And I've said many times, it was a big podium, and she was this tiny little woman with a fluff of gray hair, could barely see over the podium, but she talked with such power and integrity about the importance of history and accurately recording history. I was on the back row, just pinned to my seat in the wall with this. How have I not known about this woman? So after it was over, I don't know if I might have thanked her or said hello. I had done the publicity for her talk.
Were you filming the talk?
No, I had arranged the TV stations to come. I had arranged the press to cover it. And they did cover it because she was a big deal. So then I wrote her a fan letter in Marshall telling her how impressed I was. And she began writing, and we corresponded and we talked on the phone. And then I would visit her back and forth in Marshall. And sometimes she came to Tulsa for different occasions. And we became friends. And she was a mentor to me from then until she died. At the time I met her, I was 32. And she was 85. And she was so gracious and generous with her advice. Mostly we talked about writing. She loved writing. And I think she was very interested in helping young writers. She was very interested in helping young women because she had had a lot of trouble in her life with discrimination, and I was having some trouble with that at the university. And she said, I'm very sympathetic with people not getting the chance they deserve. And once I have all of her books that I bought. She never gave them to me. She gave me this advice. She had this scratchy little voice when I knew her. She said, Levi Strauss doesn't give away his overalls. Don't give away your books. And so I would take the books over for her to sign, and the books were used, and it amused her mightily to see what I had paid for them. Like I'm looking at one of the Tulsa books. The history of the Tulsa book originally cost like $1.50, and at the time I paid $75 for it or something. So that was very funny. Now, last night at the book signing, Bliss Books here in Stillwater has an original copy of the Tulsa history, and the price on that is $200. That would amuse her mightily. So mostly when I saw her, we talked about writing and research, and her writing and research, and her life. And we didn't have tea or coffee or cookies. We just talked. We just visited and talked.
Describe the first time that you went to Marshall and visited her. What do you recall about that?
It seemed like a long way to drive from Tulsa because, this is the prairie and you drive forever on these long straight roads. But she'd given me good directions. This tiny little white house that was always spick and span, and it was the house her brother had built with her father, I think, on the edge of a wheat field. And she told me that how much she'd like to walk out in the spring and look at the spring wheat or the winter wheat when it was coming, how much she loved that. The town had some businesses then. It had a cafe. I don't think it was Margaret's Cafe, but it was something like that, a woman's name. And as the years went on and I visited her, she would get pictures. I was pointing to pictures around here. Go get the picture off such and such, and I'll tell you about it. And when I brought it, she would say, look how clean this is. Don't I have a good house cleaner? The lady next door to her was her house cleaner. And she would tell me to come visit her in the forenoon. She had more energy in the forenoon. And while the cafe was operating, when noon came, if I was still there or if I was there with someone else, Ann Morgan and I were there together once, she said, okay, the cafe's bringing me my hot meal. You girls have to leave now for a while. And sent us off to drive around Marshall, which didn't take very long, and came back after her hot meal. It was a spick and span house, and the dining room table had a crocheted, I'm sure it was crocheted, tablecloth on it. I may be wrong about that, but it seems like that's what it was. Because one time when I was walking through to the kitchen to get some water or something, I put my purse down. She said, don't put your purse on that. That's my mother's good tablecloth. So although she was very warm and encouraging to me, she was just as stern as she was with anybody else.
Oh, that's a good story. What else do you remember about her house?
I loved snooping in it, just looking at her organ that she eventually gave to a cousin in Chicago. It had been her mother's organ. And I asked her to show me where she wrote, because she wrote a lot of the books there at that house. And it was, at that time, the second bedroom. And I took photos of it. I should send you the photos for the archives if you don't have them. So here is her little typewriter on a typing stand. I think you have one of her typewriters. And I opened up so she could put some papers here. And here's a daybed right to her left. Daybed's just a narrow bed. And she would take her notes out that she was working on and line them up like this and write from them and put them back. And she showed me her notes, which were in 2 or 3 file cabinets on that wall. It was full of notes, and she showed me how to do this. She used half pieces of paper. This is how she was taught to take notes. And you put the citation in the upper right corner, every single page. See, that's hard for me to do. Mm-hmm. The author, the publisher, the date, and then the notes. And many of them were typewritten, many were handwritten, but they were perfectly organized and legible. And I think then with shame about my own research and how I would be working within piles here and there. And she was a trained historian. She was methodical. And so she could take these notes out, put them on the daybook, type it. And when I knew her, she was just finishing, I think she finished writing it, but it was just coming out, her Geronimo book. Mm-hmm. And she said she had done the research for that years earlier, when she did some of the Indian books, 30 years early, 40, I don't know. But she had enough material meticulously maintained that she could write a book from that. And what she was then working on when I knew her was the index, which was laborious to do. It was really hard work, because she had to do it all by hand, page by page by hand. This is from a little portable manual typewriter. And she was explaining if in the text she wanted to change a word, like if she wanted to change bright, it was a bright day, she had to find a substitute word that was exactly the same size of letters. And size letters, so she couldn't put lily day because B's are bigger. It sounds very complicated. But that's the way it was then. Now, with the computers, it's easy to manipulate. Mm-hmm. But this was very hard work. And with publishers, you have a deadline to do it. They don't say, please get this done when you can. So she had to finish the galleys, proofing the galleys, make those changes, and do the index. So I was hanging around. I was always sort of hanging around these events. Like she would come to Tulsa for the re-release of Prairie City and for Geronimo, and I would help get publicity for that. And after Geronimo came out, I know one of the reporters said, will you be working, what's your next book going to be? And she said, if anybody asked me to write another book, I'd set the dogs on them if I had dogs. which was funny. She told me in her little house, in her little yard at Marshall, because now she was older, she said, all those years I fought the dandelions, and now I just give it over to them. The dandelions have won.
The half sheets of paper puzzle me a little bit. I wonder why it was practiced to just use half sheets of paper.
Well, now I think many researchers use note cards, and some use 3x5 cards. And I Goralnik, who wrote the Elvis biography, told me that he learned to take notes from his sixth grade daughter, who said, Dad, put your notes on these note cards. He said, I'm not taking instructions from a sixth grader. I use the bigger note cards. So that was the equivalent of what because she could get more information on it, I assume, and you didn't have to write the citation so many times as using 3x5 cards.
So a half sheet was better than using a 3x5 card.
Yes.
Yes.
And
okay.
I suppose it was more accessible. I don't know that they had 3x5 cards when she started researching. They had paper, typing paper, so you folded it in half and cut it, and that's what she used.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And that's the way I do it. She showed me.
You learned.
I learned that.
What do you recall about any interactions with Marshall residents when you would
They
visit her?
were lovely to me, and I got to know them very well. I can't remember his full name now, Raymond, who turned out to be her executor, a very good friend, was a wheat farmer. And I said I'd always wanted to see a wheat harvest. So he invited me over one, I think it was a Saturday. And there I go to the wheat harvest and ride the combine and ride the truck. And he was telling me about the year the wheat was so high he had to climb up on his tractor to see where he was. And he said, imagine that, lost in your own wheat field. And the next door neighbors were Hugh and Ramona, I think is her name. Angie called her my pretty neighbor.
Oh.
And Ramona typed some of her manuscripts for her, retyped it. And they were just so gracious to me, all of them. So I met all of them many times when I was there. And after Angie died, or maybe it was before, but they said, it was when Shirley Leckney was working on the biography, or after the biography of Angie came out. They said, well, we had hoped you would write the biography because we love you and you knew her so well. And Shirley was the person to do it. She had graduate assistants who could help do research in Canyon City, could do a lot more research than I was ever able to do. And after, and I never called her Angie. I always called her Dr. Debo. And Guy Logston, who knew her so well, would pronounce it Debo. And I thought, oh, that is such a country way of saying it, Guy. He's from Okema. What did he know? I think he's OSU grad. What did he know? Then I found out years later that was the preferred pronunciation, but she never corrected me. She never said, I prefer Debo. After she died, Raymond and Hugh and Ramona invited me over. But they said they had something they wanted to give me. She had a fur coat. And they said, we don't know who else. You're the only person we know who could wear this somewhere. I guess that's because I lived in the big city of Tulsa. And they gave me the fur coat. And they said, is there anything else you want? And as a memorial, and there was a little yellow tea kettle on her stove. And we have it here.
We do.
And I asked for that. It's just this little tin yellow tea kettle that I saw many times on her stove. So I took the fur coat and it smelled of mothballs. really strong. Now, I have seen a couple of photos of her wearing fur, wearing a fur coat, wearing a fur collar, and this is not the coat that they gave me. It is. I took it to Saks, and they worked to get the mothball smell out. And then, not too many years ago, I took it to a furrier to say, what kind of fur is this? It has shoulders that look like from the 40s.
It's here too.
Joan, we'll model it before we're over.
Okay.
And it's heavy. I have worn it on occasion, like when I was giving a talk about her, and said if the people would like, ladies like to come up and have your picture made in it. So the furrier said it's painted squirrel, which sounds common to us because we're from Oklahoma. But I looked it up. Joan Crawford had a painted squirrel coat. Barbara Streisand had a painted squirrel. The most famous breed was from Canada or from Russia. And it's beautiful. It's in beautiful shape. It's heavy. And so I want the archives to have that. Somebody says, so I know she pinched pennies and struggled all of her life financially, living often on grants that she got. And she saved money carefully to take her trip to Egypt or wherever she went, and how much she had to budget for that. But I like the thought that throughout her life, her adult life, she'd like to have fur now and then.
Mm-hmm.
I like that. I like that she had it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What do you know about her travels?
All I know is the letter. What was it? She'd made that big trip to Egypt. Was it to Egypt? Something like that. Before I knew her, or about that. So all I know about it is what she wrote about it in her Christmas letters. She would write long, detailed Christmas letters to everybody, and she would talk about that. She did tell me. Was it Africa? We'll have to look up where she went, because she had started sponsoring a young girl's education there, a young girl in Cairo or Kenya or somewhere. And so see, even she had no children, but wherever she went, she wanted to encourage young girls and women. So she was sponsoring someone to get an education. And I know, I really think it was Egypt, because somebody said she had planned her money so carefully, she hadn't scheduled money to ride a camel. And one of her friends at home said, we want you to ride the camel. Here's enough money to take with you to ride the camel. And I thought, how adventurous. But in a way, how fitting, because her master's degree was foreign policy. She was really entered in international history and ended up writing about mostly Oklahoma and the United States. So I'm glad she got to have that trip.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I am too chatty.
No, this is great. This is good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Tell me to.
No, you're fine. I don't want to slow down. Was she still working as an activist when you knew her?
No, she had retired. And very soon after I knew her, she had quit driving too. So she was in her 80s, and so she wasn't working. An activist.
An activist.
Oh, I was thinking
yes.
you would say archivist.
No,
oh, yes.
Activist.
Yes, she was very involved, because she said in a letter, one of her Christmas letters, she was very involved with the water rights for the Pima Indians and land rights from some natives in Alaska. Because I remember the phrase she used in a letter, I bought postage stamps like wallpaper, but I can think of no better use for them than that. And she would then give us all in her Christmas letters names of senators to write to help support this cause. So look at that. Arizona, Alaska, she was very involved with Native American rights. And at the first talk that she gave at the University of Tulsa, the Native children surrounded her. And I could see across the room, she was just thrilled to be talking to them and kind of pat head and looking down and they were so proud of her for writing their histories, their tribal histories. And it was so gratifying to her to be able to speak to the new generation of Native Americans that she had written about.
That's powerful. Did anything surprise you about her?
What surprised me, she's very direct, she's very forceful. Well, I was writing these magazine articles, nonfiction magazine articles, and I would send them to her after they were published, and she would give me comments. And I did one about railroads, and she wrote, "Not your best work."
Oh.
so she could be very direct. But what surprised me, she was so adamant about accuracy and good writing and clarity and the research. What was surprised me that she had a little sense of humor about it now and then. And I'll tell you the stories that you've heard me tell before. She was railing one day about, and she's written this, or told this to other people, about John Steinbeck and Edna Ferber, who wrote so erroneously about Oklahoma. John Stein, they said, it was as if somebody was writing the Civil War and set it in Alaska. John Steinbeck, she said, never set foot here. Now, Edna Ferber said, for her Cimarron book, she spent 8 days researching in Oklahoma. And Dr. Debo said, personally, I think she could have learned more in 8 days, but perhaps she was a slow learner. Now, I met Edna Ferber's publisher, John McCormick, at Doubleday in New York, and I told him that story. He was not amused. He said, Edna Ferber was not a slow learner. Dr. Debo got me in trouble about that. But one time she was telling me about one of her something she'd written. And I've read what she wrote about it, and I remember 2 different stories, so I'm not confident which piece it was. But an editor had inserted something in it that was erroneous. The fact was wrong, and without consulting her. And there it was in print. See, I'm thinking it was the WPA guidebook.
I've heard that.
But it might have been something else, because she had written about that. But there it was in print with her name on it. And she was so angry about this. I mean, not fiercely angry, just like I'm talking, and he put it in, and it's wrong, and it's got mine. And then she stopped and laughed, because this had happened 40 years earlier. And she said, just remember, my dear, you can't have a battle of wits with an unarmed man. So see, she had a little sense of humor about it. I wish I had not been so ignorant myself when I knew her. I think her WPA guidebook that she edited of Oklahoma is superb, better than any of the reprints. And I realized only recently, actually in the last few years when I was doing the Kate Barnard book, that her co-editor was John Oskinson. I thought, oh my God, I could have asked her about him, because he's very interesting to me. So the people that she knew that I learned about later, I thought, she could have told me so much more if I'd had the wit to ask about them. So that was my loss.
I think Anne Morgan was involved in
a reprint of
that was her in Dr. DeBoe's writing without those changes, I believe.
But Anne didn't make that mistake.
No, Anne didn't. She wanted the accurate version to be reprinted.
So, see, in one of those, Angie said, so they took my forward out or did something, and Anne had that reinserted accurately.
Yes, which is good. And Anne was a friend of yours.
Anne was a close friend of mine. And after we'd been friends for 30 years, we discovered we had the same birth date.
Oh.
A few years different. So she and I visited Dr. Debo sometimes together, at least once together. And I look at the pictures I took at Dr. Debo's house, and there's a very good one of Anne and her. And I thought, look at this. None of these people ever said, Connie, let's take your picture with Dr. Debo. I was always taking the pictures. So when it came time, wait, I was trying to think who went with this once. Some philanthropist.
I think it's in her diary, and I think I can tell you. Um,
A woman.
yes, I think, let me find it. Mrs. Anthony.
Anthony.
Nancy Anthony.
Nancy Anthony went
Mhm.
one time.
Mm-hmm.
And just Ann and I once. Okay, so about the time it was time for the portrait to be painted and installed at the state capitol, which Dr. Debo called her public hanging.
Yeah.
And Charles Banks Wilson was around, and I don't know that I saw him painted. I've seen the pictures of him painting her so much it's almost like I remember it. I talked to him about it, and I talked to her about it. And she told me the chair she was sitting in, and she was wearing that little Mexican jacket that Carolyn Foreman gave her that she loved so much. In the other portrait, she's wearing a red sweater. So Anne Morgan was a force to be reckoned with, too. And she said, the people at the state capitol, Betty, whoever was in charge of the art, won't do this right. You and I are taking over the publicity for this. I will handle all the details. You take over the statewide publicity for it. Nobody gave us authority to do that. We just did it. So I did all of these news releases, press releases, mailed them all out. Because I was working at the ballet then, and I had some skill in marketing and publicity. And I coined the phrase, First Lady of Oklahoma History. And it made me so happy to see that appear in the news releases. And Anne did a brilliant job with arrangements and getting people invited and setting it up. And the Capitol was jammed with people the day of the hanging. Were you there, Karen?
No.
It was jammed. The whole balcony was jammed. And she had to go, Dr. Debo had to go in a wheelchair. And I wanted her to have a native shawl over her lap, and didn't know how to get one that was embroidered. I could have asked somebody, so I just bought one, and it's pink with fringe, and she wore that because I thought, just in a wheelchair instead of seeing her little legs, and she was very proud of that. Not the shawl. She was very proud of the event. She said, actually, the honor should have gone to Kate Barnard. Her portrait should have been the first woman to be installed there. But she was very honored that she was chosen.
Mm-hmm. Let's go back to the jacket that she was wearing in the painting that's at the Capitol. You said that Carolyn Foreman gave that to her?
Gave it to her.
What else do you know about that?
She's wearing...
It's not in these.
It's not... She's wearing a piece of Junie jewelry. Can you see it?
She doesn't have it on in these pictures. Well, it's in the portrait, but she didn't have the jacket on at the... Oh,
Where is the portrait? Yeah.
Well, this was the day of the event.
Yes, you see this little shawl?
This one, yeah. This is the jacket. It's in that picture there. That's...
Well, in the portrait, she's wearing this Mexican jacket. She's very fond of, is it Thomas Foreman, and Carolyn Foreman? What was Carolyn Foreman's husband's name? He's a historian.
Was it Grant Foreman?
Grant Foreman.
Mm-hmm.
They were very close to her and encouraged her and helped her early in her career. And it's a Mexican jacket she said Carolyn Foreman gave her. And she's wearing a piece of Zuni turquoise jewelry in the portrait. And she often had that on. I don't remember seeing her in a red sweater, but she had, when I knew her, she was getting the dowager's hump. And one Christmas I sent her a sweater, and she sent it back because it didn't fit. And so I sent her a larger one. But I was sending her little things, and she said, "You must have had a great grandmother to be so kind to me." And I was worried about her for a while and was sending her cases of Ensure, which is a nutritional drink. And she said, "Well, sweetheart, that's very nice of you, but stop doing it. They're too heavy to carry home from the post office."
Oh.
So she was very grateful and gracious and sent it right back if it didn't work. I'm not going to be overly polite was her attitude. I will tell you the truth.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Which is so like her.
Mm-hmm. Was she a bit of a grandmotherly figure to you?
Well, that's a good question. I never thought of it like that. She was I just admired her so much for what she had accomplished and done. And so she wasn't like a grandmother. She was just an elder that I admired so much. That's a better word. She was an elder to me that I really liked. And a woman who had gone through incredible hardships and persevered and found her own destiny through hardships by being denied the opportunity that she wanted to be a university professor.
Do you have Native ancestry?
What?
Do you have Native ancestry in your
I'm a
family?
citizen of the Cherokee Nation. Mm-hmm.
Did that in any way have any bearing on your admiration for her? Have you ever thought about that?
No, because I vote in tribal elections. I follow tribal news. I am on the fringe of the Cherokee Nation. I don't speak the language. I've been to dances, those in powwows, but I am not in the tribe. I am not a tribal member in spirit. Mostly in legality and actuality. I just admired her histories that she'd written, the tribal history, and not of the Cherokee Nation, of the others, the Choctaw and the Creek. Mm-hmm. She told me, I'm sure she told me this, that at one time she thought about writing a biography of Pleasant Porter, a Creek chief, who said, "All my people are poets." But she said she discovered that he was part black, and she dropped the project because at that time that wouldn't have been acceptable. Nobody would want to know that. Mm-hmm. We were so racist. We are still so racist, but it was not acceptable. That's not coming out right. It's not that it wasn't acceptable to write about a figure who was part black, because the Creeks intermarried as much or more than the other tribes. It was that it would have been so unpopular with the public, it would not have been a success at all. Unlike the Geronimo book, people could identify with him. I'm sure it's Pleasant Porter, and if it's not, I will check my notes and correct it on the transcription.
Okay.
But one of the people she helped with Kate Barnard research was Edith Copeland, the woman who started the research on Kate. And Angie helped her a lot. And then she helped and advised the second woman, Julie Short, on her research. And she wrote me letters about both of them. Edith had already died. Julie had faded off the scene. But she said Edith Copeland told her that she had irrefutable evidence that Kate Barnard had an affair with her assistant, Hobart Hewson. And that Edith said she dropped the project then because she wouldn't say that about Kate in print. Now, I find that hard to believe. I didn't find that evidence. There were rumors and hints. But Kate was such a popular figure, if there'd been evidence, she had so many enemies, they would have outed her in a minute. And Hobart Hewson was such a little snake. He wouldn't have, of course he wanted to charm her and seduce every woman he met, but he wouldn't have risked his own career to do that. So the point of that story is all of that research and writing was at a time when we weren't as acceptable as things as we are now, whether it's race or sex. And Angie didn't care. She wasn't making a point, did Kate Barnett have an affair or not. She was just saying that's what Edith said, and why she stopped the book. But we all have lots of excuses of why we don't finish projects, don't we?
Yes. Let's go back to the correspondence. Did you talk on the phone with her?
I did. We talked on the phone. So I have my correspondence from 75 or 74 until she died, and I have her letters to me. Some I have transcribed. I have a few copies of what I wrote her, not many. But when I have one folder are notes I've taken when I was on the phone, on scraps of paper. One's on a paper plate that happened to be in the kitchen where I was talking. Or when I left her home, when I visited her, I would take little notes. Or after meeting her somewhere, I would write down, I remember she said this. So I have all of this bits and pieces of information, and I'm trying to decide what to do with it before. Now I'm 80, now, and I won't be along forever. And somebody would come in and see all this old material and just throw it away. So I've talked to Kurt here, do we want them in the archives? Talking to OU Press, would it be of interest? I always thought I would write a little book about this mentorship, but because it seems universal, an older person helping a younger person, especially a writer, a woman to a young woman. Would that be of interest to anybody? And so I'm asking OU Press, a little book, beautifully designed to show some of her little handwriting. And is it too narrow of a focus? How much are you going to talk about yourself? So that's where I am. Whether I just send the whole thing over and say, do with it what you want, or should I work on this a little bit? And that's where I am. I don't know.
I think you should do it anyway.
This is what we want to hear. But it's like the Kate Barnett book. I always thought I would do that. And I started the research 50 years ago when Dr. Debo was alive. And I told her I would write the book. She'd asked me to write it. I know she asked other people too. And so I say in the beginning of my book, it's taken a long time to finish, but it feels good to keep my promise to her and to myself. And to write this little book about how she guided me and encouraged is the main thing. As sort of an example, we should pass this on to other people. One of the books she signed to me was, you will be writing, I will not be writing any more books, but you will be writing them and I will be reading them. And it's just sort of like passing a little, not just a flame or a blessing, it's like, here's a responsibility I'm turning over to you.
Did that ever feel like a burden in any way?
When I ended up with 9 banker's boxes of research material, letters and clippings and copies, and dragging those around, they fill the room and fill the closet. That seemed like a burden, an unfinished burden. I haven't done this, and I've promised a Western History collection. I will send it to them. So I have to now decide, am I going to do anything else with some of that material? Am I going to need to go back into it for any reason? Because there are copies of letters that other people haven't seen, or do I need them? If I don't need, because I'm too old to go back and forth to Norman to look in the archives, my own archives. So, but it would be nice to get it out of there.
When you would go visit her, you said you would take notes. Did you ever record?
I do. I do have a few
You
recordings.
have some recordings?
That's a good point. I do have a little cassette tape.
Mm-hmm.
It got harder and harder as her hearing got worse and worse. It was really hard for her to hear me, and almost impossible to talk on the phone. If my husband Jay Cronley answered the phone, she could hear him very well. She liked him. She could hear Ann Morgan. Ann had a deeper voice than I have, or could modulate it. Ann was a former debater, so she could hear Ann. And I often sat, when she sat in that chair, sometimes I sat right at her feet. I pulled up a chair real closely, or right at her feet to be close enough for her to hear. And it was not hearing was very frustrating to her. And she said that she had read that people who were blind and people who were deaf, they said losing hearing is more isolating than losing vision.
Mm-hmm.
And she said, I believe that. It's very isolating. And now I am having trouble hearing. I have a hearing test Tuesday, as a matter. So I see what she's saying. I mean, I understand what she means. It's especially across a room or some voices, and you see their mouth and you know they're talking. And to be so articulate as she was, that had to be a great frustration to her.
I read in her diary entry that she spoke with your journalism class. Do you remember how the students received her when she spoke with
I forgot
college
that.
students? Or
I'm thinking about this.
this is the entry. It's April 10th, 1978. She just mentions it, but anyway.
See, this is good. This is good. Ruth Harrington is one of the librarians from Tulsa, University of Tulsa, McFarland Library. She was very close to Ruth. And so it says up in 76, Ruth and her husband Homer came to get her and took her to Tulsa. And in 78 in April, she was back in Tulsa. And I don't know if I went to get her or if somebody else went to get her, but it says there that she visited friends at the library and she came to a journalism class that I taught. I taught journalism writing. And I had as many people as I could go to my class, and they interviewed who I was having. So I had them interview her. And she enjoyed that. I could tell she enjoyed it because they had good questions. She liked working with young people. She wanted to encourage young writers. She once wrote me a letter said she talked with a young woman who wanted to be a writer, and Dr. Debo said, I don't know what to tell her. What's the best way to go? She said, I only had one English class in my own college career, and you are a writer, your husband is a writer. What is the advice to give her? So whatever I wrote her, she said, that's exactly what I need to know, and I am keeping that to tell other young writers. It was probably some advice of some books like Elements of Style, or whatever. But it tells me that she was always wanting to encourage people who came to her personally or to my class of students. And she answered their questions very seriously and took it very seriously, just like these are professional journalists asking her questions. It was very warm and gracious to them. Gosh, I forgot that.
After a few years in her entries, she refers to you as my beloved, Connie Cronley, which is so sweet.
I know.
Term of endearment that she used with other people too.
I know.
I just love that.
Her letters are Connie dear, or my beloved Connie. She's very But you're right, she addressed other people with that genuine sentiment. So to be so, not crusty, that's the wrong word, but to be so firm in her. She would not back down on her facts and information and where she stood on things with history, but she was very warm. That's what I'm trying to say. Genuinely warm to people and affectionate, and not in a gooey way, not huggy and kissy, just.
Do you recall any of her favorite sayings? You've mentioned a few. Does anything else come to mind that stayed with you?
She didn't use slang. She never swore. She always used good grammar. She was an intelligent, articulate woman and was serious. And sometimes she would save up things to tell me when I came. I was reviewing all these letters before I came because I'm trying to decide what to do with them. And I came across one that said, "There's something I have to tell you, and I don't want to put it in writing. You must come to Marshall and let me talk to you in person." Did I tell you this already,
No.
Karen? So I go over, and she was telling me about this. She said, "I will tell you in person, but there was a period of my life," this is in the letter, "of about 9 years when I was in such despair I didn't care if I lived or died. But I see now," this is when her career as a university professor had been blocked because nobody would hire a woman history teacher then. And she had 2 manuscripts of historical writing. One was in Stillwater's run, and the other was her Choctaw book, and they had not been published. And she said, "I was in such despair, I really didn't care if I lived." And when I got through that, I see that those experiences of not getting a university job led me to the career that I was intended to have, which was writing history. So when I went to see her, she told me that in more detail. And she told me that at one time she was with friends in a little car trip, and there was car trouble. She was standing by the edge of the road, and they said, "Angie, move, the car's going to hit you." And she said, "It doesn't matter." She was that down, which we don't think of her that way.
Mm-hmm.
But when I think that when she was then writing her history books, she relied mostly on getting grants. I mean, this was in the Depression. Think of the courage that took to try to get a grant, to scrape by with money and stretch it out while you're doing that work. This was when she was starting her writing career. And she was telling me this because I was having big trouble at the university with discrimination. I had been passed over for a job for a man who had half the credentials that were advertised for, and I had twice them. And should I sue for sex discrimination? They had a row of lawyers. What would this cost me? What would this do? Would equal opportunity come to my defense? And so that's why she was telling me this. I know what that feels like. And in a way, what she was saying is, and she said, what she was saying in a way was, trust that it's going to work out and take you where you need to go. And probably saying in a way, it's not going to work out there the way you want it to go. Mm-hmm. And it wouldn't have. It was at a time in the 70s where women were not equal on campus. Women's pantsuits were fashionable. And the way I remember the story is we had to ask permission, and it went clear to the president of the university if we women staff could wear pantsuits to work. And it was, if it's a pantsuit, yes, but not more than 3 times a week.
Oh my goodness.
I mean, it was very rigid. And they would say things, women applied to be the manager of the radio station. Say, we can't have a woman running that. It was very clear, although we were mouthing a different equality, it was a different way. So what she wanted to tell me was that story. Then not soon after that, Shirley Leckie started writing her biography, and I know she told Shirley that story. So she must have thought about, I need to tell this story now and let other people know that we go through hardships, we go through hard times. And I don't know if it's on the film, the documentary that they made. Some of it is about 30 universities applied for a woman professor who would take no woman at all. Mm-hmm. She told some of that story. But it was hard for her at first to talk about how depressed she was when she could not get her career going. And understandably, mm-hmm. It's hard times.
Mm-hmm. What do you think about the documentary?
I don't like that it shows her as an old woman. She was an old woman, and I know that. But to me, and I haven't watched it recently, but to me the prevailing image was of her being old and frail. And I would rather have had more still pictures when she was young and vibrant and going and hear her voice. Of course, they did a good job. Mm-hmm. And I participated some with Shirley's research and with those two filmmakers. I worked with them. I shared everything I knew and things I had. So I'm so glad that it's there. I just wish, I guess I wish they'd made it 30 years earlier. Mm-hmm. What do you think about it? I'm just curious.
I agree with that to a certain extent. I'm glad we have it, because there's nothing else like it.
It's factual.
It's great. And several years ago, the library here, there was a project. I believe they received some grant funding to make sure that all of the libraries in Oklahoma had a copy of that film.
See, it's important
that we would work through many, rights and legal issues and all of that, but they weren't going to sell it, but they wanted to ensure that the libraries had it.
That's
in
good.
Their collections.
That's good.
Yeah, so that was
I think we're all on the same mission. Dr. Debo was so important. Her work is so important, and we want it retained. I just love what OSU has done. The plaques out in the hall. I love that the library has a statue of her downtown. I think this is wonderful. Think what she would think of that. She would be delighted. When I knew her, she was getting awards and publicity, and it amused her mightily. She said, I have tapped out more bad stories about Oklahoma than anybody, but it was gratifying and pleasurable for her to be awarded those honors. She would be so happy to see these plaques and statues here. Not in a boastful way, but just look at that.
Describe any ceremonies honoring her that you attended. What comes to your mind when I ask that?
Well, I was here. I never went to Prairie City Days when she was chair of that, leading the parade. And I can't remember if she was wearing her I think it was her mother's dress and bonnet. She writes somewhere where she was doing that. Because Larry McMurtry wrote two big pieces about her. One, I think, in the New York Review of Books. A great big essay about her that was very flattering. And then he wrote, but in her later years, she got cute and dressed like Queen Victoria, which made me so angry. So I wrote him and said, no, you must see a picture of her from Prairie City Days, and that's in the costume. It was her mother's stuff. That was the costume. So see, there he made a mistake without verifying it, which is the stuff she hated. And at least he was nice enough to write back and say, thank you for telling me this. So I never saw Prairie City Days. The OU president flew in once to give her some big award from OU, and there was a big ceremony at the church, and there were more cakes and pies. It stretched to the horizon, so I was there for that. She got an award as a newsmaker, I think, at Tulsa once, and she couldn't come, so she asked me to accept it for her. That was an honor. That was early on. What else did she have? She had a big birthday party in Marshall that a lot of celebrities came for, academic celebrities, and I was there for that. I was certainly there for her public hanging. I was just feeling like I was kind of around all the time, just around.
Were you able to attend her funeral service?
I did, and cried all the way over here. And I was on my way to go in and slip at the back. And Morgan was down with what would have been the family in an off room. That would have been her neighbors because they were her family. And she said, "Connie, come here with us." So we sat down close. That's the way Anne read her life and mine. And after it was over, it was very disturbing because when we go up the steps of this church, Anne started to go left. I said, "You don't want to go that way," because there was Angie in an open casket on sort of a foyer. We don't want to see this. I didn't want to see this, I don't remember. And it seemed, was it Gloria Valencia Weber who did the tribute? Somebody did a tribute to her that was very academic. She would have loved that because it's academic. I would have preferred it to be more personal. But it was the church was packed, and there was Charles Banks Wilson. And Anne and I said, "Do you want to ride with us to the cemetery?" Yes, he did. Well, here's Charles Banks Wilson with his mustaches, being the dapper cowboy gallant. And he's so busy kissing all the ladies' hands and charming them, and they're just wooing. We missed the funeral procession, and we couldn't find the cemetery. And here's this open prairie by Marshall, and I've never seen her grave. But we spent time with Charles Banks Wilson.
That's good. As we wind down this interview and you look back on your interactions with her, what stands out to you?
What stands out to me is her openness and generosity to me, and welcoming me into the community of writers and historical writers. She was very ill when she was writing me a support letter to get an NEH grant to write this back in the 70s, which I didn't get. It was rejected so fast. It was like they were hitting fungos because I wanted to write it for a general audience, and they wanted an academic only to write for NH.
What, for the Kate Bernard book?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay.
But Dr. Debo and I knew from the beginning that if I were to write it, it would be for a general audience because I am not a professional historian. I don't profess to be. And I would not write an academic publication. I would write it for a general audience. She said that in a nice way in her support letter. Although she is not a historian, she will write this historically accurately and it will have a broader audience. So see, she knew what I was up against for failure. But then when she got a little better, whatever she was sick with, as she got better, and I sent her a copy of the whole proposal that I had done with her letter. She said, in essence, "Well, I'm surprised it's as good as it is because it's a lot more research than I thought you'd done." But I mean, she was pleasantly surprised. So she was very, as open and warm and helpful as she was to me, she knew where I would fit in this. Mm-hmm. Where Gloria Valencia Weber, I think that's her name, is an academic. She did a different thing. So Angie would, and I never called her Angie, would talk different languages to different people. And this is the way she spoke to me. When she talked to me about Kate Barnard, she told me about seeing her speak. And Dr. Debo was a young territorial teacher, and Kate Barnard came to speak to a territorial teachers meeting. And she said the room was packed, and that's when she told me about how Kate would raise her hand over her head and say, as long as God lets me live, I will fight for the children. And she told me that she had a voice of sweetness and almost hypnotic power over an audience. She said they were just hushed. She said, Dr. Debo said, FDR had that power in an audience, and Amy Semple McPherson. And Kate Barnard's the only other one I saw have it. She said it was so crammed, one young teacher was kind of leaning across almost in front of Dr. Debo's chair, supporting herself at an angle. Said she stood that way an hour listening to Kate talk. Nobody would move. So Kate Barnard was a big influence on Dr. Debo. As a woman, professional woman, she saw a spectacular rise and crash, and she knew more about her than after she did her research for And Still the Waters Run, because that's where she told me to trace the footnotes. I don't know, she may have seen Edith Copeland's letters. She was more interested in my writing about her professional work and her department than her whole life. But that's what I wrote. Are we through?
Just about. Do you need do we need a pause?
No, I just thought you were right.
Okay. Do you feel that there are any new insights into Dr. Debo that you have gained about her over time?
I don't think, about money. I mean, I know she had job security when she worked here at the university. I think it must have been a very economically unstable life all the time she was writing and depending on grants and sort of begging people like E.E. Dale to support her in grants and support this way. And they did, not as much as they could. He could have hired her at OU, he didn't. And I think that was a precarious existence. And it was depression, or right after depression. And I think that was so hard. Because I've always had jobs with a regular check and health insurance until I retired. And now I think, oh my God, it's scary when you don't have money coming in every month. And I don't think, I know I didn't realize that. We never talked about money. Like, how did you do it? You know, you took care of your mother. And she didn't have Social Security then, I wouldn't think. I don't think her mother had. I mean, how did she do it? I think I didn't take into account how very courageous she was to. She said she always had a drive, a strong drive, to do what she did with her research and her writing without a financial background of support. I couldn't do that. It's hard to freelance. It's hard to freelance academic historical works, I think. And she did this. That's like a miracle that she could do all of that. Because she wanted it so much, she just made it happen and squeezed the money. That's the way I see it. Maybe she had an inheritance somewhere that I didn't know about, but I don't think so.
What should people think of when they think of her?
What do people think?
What should they think of when they think of her?
Well, when I give lots of talks, even before the Kate book, and I almost always referred to her and to my late husband, Jay Cronley. These are two writers I don't want people to forget. And what people should know about her was that she was a trailblazer. She wrote Native American history before anybody else did it, with a different perspective. She had, more than I know, she had done some field research into Native American lives after the Dawes Act, and she saw the poverty, and she saw the health problems, and she knew what the dissolvement of the tribes had done to the people. She saw that grinding poverty over in Cherokee, especially. She had such a clear eye on what had happened and what the conditions were now because of it. And she wrote it, and she had the courage to write it. And she knew who the scoundrels were, and she named a lot of them. Now, I really think she had to edit out some of her comments about Robert L. Owen in her It's Still the Waters Run book, because he was still powerful when that book was published, when OU Press wouldn't publish it, and she pulled it. And I swear, when I worked with that book a whole lot when I was writing the Kate biography, and I swear I can see places that the style skips a little bit. So that doesn't have the flow. It would be interesting to compare the book with the original manuscript, because I think he was a scalawag. I mean, he was a big deal politician and senator, but he got off his money in scrupulous ways from the Cherokee allotments that we don't talk about very much. But I'm sure Dr. Debo knew more than she wrote. Mm-hmm. Where did I get down that rabbit track? She knew the whole true story, and she said a lot of it. She could have said more.
Is there anything that I have not asked
you have been so thorough
like to share?
No, you have been so thorough. If I think of an anecdote, I will add it.
Okay.
When you send the transcript, I will just type it up.
Okay. Okay, so the last question, we're going to turn back to you. We started the interview about you, a little bit about your life, and so we'll turn back to you. So how do you want to be remembered?
I don't think I will be remembered at all. I'm outliving all my friends and relatives. I don't intend to have a funeral. Jay used to say, well, when you die, we'll have you cremated and your ashes thrown on the kitchen floor where nobody will notice them anyway. Spent all my time cleaning floors. I think, I've had a varied career, and it's been a fabulous life and an interesting life, and it's been so exciting to do all the things that I've done. I met a lot of great people in ballet, like Madame Danilova. She came to Tulsa when she was the great prima ballerina Assoluta from the Russian ballet, and she came to Tulsa once and called me from the hotel. They had put her, she was so tiny, in a room with a king-size bed. She said, what am I to do with that? And she couldn't get her false eyelashes off, and she couldn't get her dress unzipped. So she was just laughing at her plight. Well, after pandemic, I haven't left the house, it seems, in 5 years. So I check into this hotel, and I think I'm just like Madame Danilova. I can't work the phone. I can't get the coffee machine to work. So I am so lucky. I've had this great opportunity of life. So I worked at the ballet, and it was very exciting. And then I took some time off to write Dr. Edward Perkins' memoir about being a career ambassador. He was the first American Black ambassador sent to South Africa to end apartheid without violence. And that book took 8 years of interviews. And when I did the plan for it, I had 18 months planned for interviews and writing. 8 years later, nobody can talk like ambassadors. So I was going back and forth to Norman for interviews for that. And that was a fascinating experience. We went to South Africa, and I saw when he walked there, it was like waters parting. He was a god there. And to meet those activists that he had worked with and to see those scenes, that was exciting. Then I went to work at Iron Gate, which is a soup kitchen, managing that. So I went from wearing little black dresses at the ballet to hugging people who'd slept under the bridge. And I got to know these people who are working poor or life on the street. And I thought, I am so grateful to have an opportunity to see these different lifestyles. And I've just been very lucky. And now to have the Kate book out and people like it. I give lots of talks about it to book clubs or groups, and usually they're almost all, they are adults, many retired, and they are outraged. And they say, how did we not know about her? How have we not been taught this? And we've not been told a lot of things about our Oklahoma history that we're now learning and hearing and are ready to hear. So that's another thing I'm so grateful. Dr. Debo introduced me to Kate and sort of urged me on that way.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you
for the interview today. I
You had to
appreciate it.
twist my arm to get me to do this, but you have made it easy, and you have asked great questions. Thank you all for what you do.
Thank you very much.